Welcome to our live panel, Connectivity Standards Right or Wrong for the IoT. We are here at Ingenu, founded in 2008. Ingenu, which created RPMA, is building the machine network, the world's most reliable wireless network made exclusively for machines. So a little bit about our panel members here. We have Dr. Ted Myers,
Hello.
right here next to me. He's the co-founder and chief technology officer at Ingenu. Prior to Ingenu, he co-founded ComASIC, which was later acquired by Freescale Semiconductor. Over here we have Joshua Builta, our vice president of product management at Ingenu. He drives Ingenu's product portfolio strategy, and prior to Ingenu, Josh served as associate director for about 6 years with IHS Research's M2M group. And I'm Mike. I'll be our moderator, principal data scientist here at Ingenu. So thank you. Welcome, everyone. All right, so a little bit about our panel and about our discussion today. There's a lot of conversation about the role of standards in the IoT, and not a lot of talk about what those standards are supposed to bring to those that are participating in the IoT. And so we're going to help differentiate between the different versions of what standards are. We have data standards, which we all agree are very important, something that you should support and enable. There are connectivity standards, which will be the focus of what we're talking about today, as well as the standards making process. And those three things are often confounded when people say standards. So we'll help to clear up a bit the difference between those and focus on what those are supposed to bring to those who are participating in the IoT. So after this panel, you should understand what benefits standards are supposed to bring and what you should be able to accomplish and how your technology should be improved or not be improved based on what the standards are. So the discussion we're going to have today is framed by a report by Makina. And the reason we went with the framework we're going to be using for some of the discussion points and questions is because it simplified the discussion very well and made it so that we could talk about it in a way that clarified the difference between connectivity standards, the standards making process, and data standards. All right, with that, I guess we'll go ahead and dive right in. So our first question is, so standards are purportedly there to prevent a single company from charging monopolistic prices. Josh, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's an understandable concern. Certainly we all want to avoid a situation where a single company has complete control over a market or a technology that it can essentially demand unreasonable pricing for that service. And of course here in the US and international markets we have antitrust and competition laws which prohibit that, but it still does occur. However, in the IoT market, I don't think that's much of a legitimate concern. One reason is no technology has a monopoly in the IoT space. Ted, I mean, as you know, in IoT deployments, such a wide variety of technologies are used, from long-range wireless solutions such as satellite and cellular, as well as RPMA, to short-range solutions, to wireline technologies. And I think that will remain the case moving forward, that the IoT will be made up this smorgasbord of technologies, and no technology will really have a monopoly. I think the other problem I have with that statement is anyone that spends any time in this market, one thing that becomes abundantly clear is it's extremely price sensitive. And any technology, no matter what its other benefits are, if it's not priced appropriately, it will not succeed in this market. And any company that comes in and charges monopolistic type prices for its solution, they're not going to connect many IoT devices, and they're not going to be around for very long. So I would argue we don't need standards to regulate and ensure fair pricing in the IoT. I think this will happen naturally as this market evolves and competition increases. I would also say that really the IoT's only started taking off since we've had priced appropriate connectivity technologies be introduced. And that's really making it easier for customers to realize a very strong and immediate ROI.
Ted, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, really what it comes down to, standards or not, is the business case of connectivity. So as Josh pointed out, these are very price sensitive devices. They're very interesting because there's so many of them. There's billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of devices. But if you look at the business case for any given device, it's challenging. It's very challenging because you have to basically have value on that device when you factor in the connectivity costs. And connectivity costs, they come in a few different buckets. There's the cost of the modem hardware, but there's also the cost of the connectivity, whether that's monthly, yearly, or a one-time fee bundled into the price of the endpoint. This has to make sense for any given device if it's going to make sense for all devices. And so I think it's the technology and the approach that brings down that cost of connectivity that's going to really unlock these tens or hundreds of billions of dollars. And I guess the last thing I'd like to point out is that, the kind of a counterexample, I guess, if you will, where the cellular industry, 10 years ago or 20 years ago, they'd be kind of disappointed, I think, with the number of devices that are actually connected today on that network. And, I think there's a number of reasons for that, but the cost, I think, is a big one. The cost of connectivity just hasn't been brought down to where it needs to be to enable these devices. And so if you're looking in the rearview mirror and you're a connectivity vendor, like we are, you learn from that lesson. And the fact that anybody, like Josh said, going after monopolistic pricing, I think they would be disregarding history, and they're not going to be around much longer, to be frank.
Yeah, that's a good point, I think. I mean, and just because something becomes a standard, that doesn't automatically bring down pricing. That's sort of a misconception. I mean, you look at LTE, high-speed LTE, and look at its hardware is still priced relatively high, and that's one reason it hasn't seen much use in the IoT market, and it won't see much use until those price points come down. The IoT it's a very competitive market right now. It's survival of the fittest, and perspective, connectivity technology, the fittest solutions are those that are reliable and a low-cost solution, and you don't need to be a standard to hit those two benchmarks.
Great, thank you very much. Excellent points. All right, so our second question, so standards are supposed to bring or provide a technically superior solution. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I just don't think that's completely accurate. I mean, look, there are times when going through a collaborative process is beneficial. And certainly at Ingenu, we understand that. We partner with hardware developers and software developers to offer our customers a more comprehensive and complete end-to-end solution. But the process that you're talking about here, the collaborative process you're talking about here, putting a technology through a standards body, I think the end result there is generally less positive. When a technology goes through a standards body, there has to be a series of trade-offs and compromises. And really the end result is a less technically superior product. And it certainly results in less innovation, right? I think you look at the greatest innovation in recent years, whether it's in the telecom space or in some other market, very rarely would you say that happened because of a standards body. It actually happens in spite of standards bodies in some points. And I think cellular is a good example. Ted, I know you've talked to me in the past about how CDMA and LTE were actually introduced into the 3GPP process.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I think it largely comes to bear these institutional issues that you discussed. You don't have to go back too far in history to really observe, the standardization and its overlay, on the cellular body. We have we're very privileged to have Dr. Andrew Viterbi on our advisory board, and he's been advising us from the beginning, and he's had a bird's eye seat into some pretty interesting times in the cellular space. The inflection points between 2G and 3G, and ultimately between 3G and 4G. And so he was pretty much at ground zero. And if you go back and you look at, let's take the first one. Let's take 3G and how that came into being. That essentially was CDMA, and the CDMA was very innovative at the time. It was developed primarily by one company who commercialized it, made it the commercial system that it is today, and that happened to be Qualcomm. And so that was pretty much rubber stamped, put into the 3GPP2 process, which eventually was absorbed into 3GPP. 3GPP being the third generation partnership project that really drives all of the standards of the cellular body. So then it was commercialized, matured more into WCDMA that really kind of took over the world for 3G technology. So that was a good path. It really brought a lot of value to the consumer, but there's a theme emerging where that was actually innovation that was kind of inorganically injected into the process, and the cellular body just commercialized it and matured it. So then, more recently there was the 3G to 4G transition, where in that case LTE, we all know it, we all love it, it's in our handset, providing tremendous value, but that was primarily developed by a company called Flareon, a very small company that felt passionate that this was the right approach. OFDMA was it. They got major carriers on board, T-Mobile, Vodafone. They loved it. They threw their weight around in the standards body to make that happen. And so in that case, 3GPP, they were great at maturing it and making it, a worldwide standard. But in the process, they didn't do the innovation. And, depending on who you actually talk to, some folks would even say that, the resultant LTE was somewhat watered down, relative to the initial innovation. So I think that is one of the logical outcomes of some of this institutional effects that you flagged.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other thing is because of their size, standards bodies tend to move very slowly. The 3GPP has about 400 member companies that participate in that. And the result is, again, they're not very agile. They are the standards bearer for the mobile market, one of the most rapidly evolving industries in the world, and they average a new release every 18 to 20 months, perhaps. So you might make the case that they're not keeping up with the pace of innovation in the market, and of course, that's an area where us being a smaller organization, we can be a little bit more agile and respond to the needs of the market. And perhaps that's a reason that we've had a low power, wide area solution in the market for several years, while the cellular industry is just getting to that today.
Okay, so thank you, Josh. That actually segues nicely into question 3. You talked a bit about all the participants in 3GPP. So the third concern or third thing that many believe that a standards process and a connectivity standard should bring to the customer is that all interested parties can influence the technology's direction. And you mentioned that there are 400 influencers in that case. So what are your thoughts on these things?
Yeah, well, there certainly are a lot of parties that can influence a standards body. I guess my biggest takeaway or concern with that is none of those parties are explicitly representing or advocating for the customer. Multinational companies, I mentioned there's like 400 participating in the 3GPP. They do not magically stop looking out for their own self-interest the moment they walk into that standards body. Understandably so, they're going to push that standards body to adopt an approach that's most beneficial for them. And I think the end result of that is individual company interest and demands, things related to intellectual property rights. Those tend to have a heavy influence on the direction that standards body takes. And again, that's understandable from an individual company's perspective, but the concern is it really washes out and drowns out the voice of the customer and of the market. And I think with our approach, the voice of the customer is heard a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, Josh. And all I can really do is draw from my own experiences. The last 8 years being very tightly associated with RPMA, and the sort of the unconstrained aspect of being able to concentrate on what the customer is telling you. I think we find extremely valuable. We go back to 8 years ago. We had some very demanding customers. Initially utility space, oil and gas space, and we probably appreciate it more now in retrospect than we did at the time. But yeah, their demandingness was, resulted in some very concrete requirements in terms of security and robustness. And being kind of an agile organization, we were able to kind of bend to that. And and most of these requirements, I'd have to say in retrospect, ended up being common denominator requirements that all customers, found whether they needed it or not, they needed it. And so I think that was really beneficial for the agility of a single unconstrained development, in contrast to the battleship that is, some of these standards organization.
Absolutely.
And then, well, just kind of on this subject, like another voice, and this voice can't be ignored under any circumstances, is really the law of physics. And so that manifests in many ways in wireless. And, the law of physics isn't intuitively obvious, or wasn't intuitively obvious to us at the time in regards to channel models, channel variability, path loss distributions, interference in the ISM band, where we chose to set up shop. So we kind of learned this by degrees in a very iterative fashion. And being able to take those learnings and incorporate that back into a development process without this constant back and forth on IPR rights, really, we were very fortunate to be able to undertake a development kind of in that environment.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to learn those lessons in a standards body or in a boardroom. You're going to learn them only through real-world deployments and having an actual dialogue with your customers, right? And obviously, that's something we've been doing several years and improving and enhancing our technology as a result of those dialogues. And that's obviously something I think we'll continue to do moving forward.
Yeah, so that actually reminds me of a really great business philosophy called failing fast. A lot of entrepreneurs and startup companies talk about that. And the idea is to quickly develop a minimum viable product, iterate on it, figure out what works and what doesn't work, and then integrate the feedback into your solution. It sounds like that's pretty much what has been going on here at Ingenu for quite a while.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of it.
Yeah,
Precisely.
awesome. Okay, good. Well, excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, for that discussion. All right, so the final question, the final discussion point is that standards bodies are supposed to help give you that one network feel, and that one network feel for customers and for application partners, so those actually manufacturing the devices that are going to go onto the network. So tell us a little bit about your thoughts on those things.
I'll take this one. I mean, I think I'll speak from an ecosystem partner perspective.
Okay.
In my role currently, one of my major responsibilities is going out, engaging, and interacting with these potential ecosystem partners. I do that on a daily basis, and I can tell you during those conversations, whether or not we have a common look and feel or we're going through a standards body process, that topic rarely, if ever, comes up. The questions they ask are, what are the benefits of your technology? What are the attributes of your technology? Why is it better than the other solutions in the market? And what is your go-to-market strategy? And those are the questions they ask, because that's what's ultimately going to determine whether or not we're successful and whether or not we're somebody that they want to partner with. So I don't view that consideration as something that's hindering our partnerships. And the proof's in the pudding. We've announced several partnerships in recent months, and we'll have even more of those coming in the future. So I don't view that concern in hindering at all our partnerships.
Okay, all right. Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concern is extremely, right on. The ability to have kind of out-of-the-box, ubiquitous connectivity. I mean, ideally, a connectivity, you shouldn't even really know it's there. It should just kind of do its job. And so simple, seamless, single network, global reach, these are great things. I think I would agree with what Josh is saying, that may not necessarily be correlated to whether it's a standard or not a standard. Case in point, the cellular industry, there's some headwinds, I would say, for these kind of low-end billions, tens of billions of devices around a few, around really even getting into the ecosystem in the first place. You have bands all over the world that are very different, different RF, different antennas. If you want to have this access to this global market, you have to be a little bit strategic. Like, what bands am I going to support, and what cost can this relatively low-end device even bear? And then potentially worse, and we hear this from a lot of the people we talk to in the industry, is just the certification overhead, which is perfectly appropriate for cell phones and high-speed data devices. But when you're talking low-end devices and you have to deal with carrier after carrier after carrier, each with different rules, different regulations, different costs, different labs, that really ends up being kind of a headwind. So if you're having a device that you're trying to sell into, you have to be somewhat strategic for the carriers that you're going to select. And then, one other kind of dimension to this is even the technology selection, right? I think most people would agree you go 4G today because that's the one that's going to be around the longest. But that doesn't take you out of having to support 2G and 3G because those are there for coverage. So you have these multi-mode devices that all impact cost, impact certification, complexity, and then you have to kind of wonder going forward, all right, I have this device out in the field, but 4G, is it going to be around forever? I don't know. Like, it's hard to know.
What bands do I support on 4G?
What bands do support on 4G? All these questions, and if you look back to the business case, it's fragile, right? So
difficult.
can you go in and touch a device if that technology sunsets before the expected life? I think it's hard to imagine a business case where that would be acceptable. And so I think a lot of those things were what we observed when we started the RPMA development, and that's what drew us like a moth to a flame to the 2.4 band, right? Worldwide, if you know anything about spectrum, 80 megahertz, that's a ton, available, worldwide, and then, basically ensuring uniformity at the start so that if you're certified on one network, you're certified on them all, and then being able to say, hey, there's no fear that RPMA is going to go away, it's going to be there for as long as your product, because we're not going to be tweaking it and we're not going to be breaking backward compatibility. So, whether it's related to standards or not, a lot to kind of what Josh has already said, it doesn't feel like it is, that there's other, overarching considerations whether you get this, single network feel that you wisely asked about.
Those are good points, and something else to add to the 2.4 band, I guess, benefits or things that it brings is, with regards to your partnerships and the partners that can sign on, is you really have access to the world's largest IoT marketplace because
Yeah.
you have essentially coverage over the entire world using one module, and then you're done. I mean, so any partnership that or any partner that wants to join or make a device has a global market instantly.
Single
with one
global
band.
SKU, which is obviously something you can't get in the cellular market. Even if you decide I want to use LTE, different bands in different regions, you can't get that with cellular.
If you own a washing machine factory in China, as these things pop off the line, slap a module in there. You're making the device smarter. You don't care where it's going. You just know it's going to be in. It's not going off the planet Earth, so it's going to be in the footprint of the network. I think that's a pretty powerful vision that seems to be resonating well with the ecosystem.
Yeah, in that same factory, I mean, they'll reach scale a lot quicker as well, simply because
Precisely,
they only have to cut up. They don't have to cut up their production across different regions and different modules. They have just one line to go down. And I'm thinking about as well is the consumer's benefit too, because if you have such a large marketplace, a startup in Asia can compete with one in Europe or anywhere else, right? Because they're all in the same marketplace. So consumers benefit because now you have partners that are going to try and make a better product for the consumer. They'll either make a product with the same benefits and the same features and reduce price, or they'll maybe keep the price the same and make better features. So consumers win, the partners win. It really is it's a pretty nice.
Everybody's winning. Yeah.
Everybody wins. Everybody gets a trophy, right?
Yeah.
We're all winners. All right, great. So
Yeah.
we talked about quite a bit. So let me just review this a bit for our participants here. So our first question or first thing was that standards are purportedly supposed to prevent a single company from charging monopolistic prices, and we talked a bit about the fact that there's product substitution. Right? There are many options for getting connectivity, and no one single product is going to be able to charge whatever they want, especially because, like you said, it's a price-sensitive market. So that's something that just can't happen given all the options and the increasing options that there are when it comes to getting connected to the IoT. Okay, the second thing we talked about was that standards are supposed to provide a technically superior solution. And we talked a bit about the intellectual property rights conundrum, where basically, a company that participates in the standards process is going to want their IP, their intellectual property, to be put in there. That's how they get revenue, and that's fine, except when maybe one company's intellectual property doesn't perform quite as well as another's, but they're able to get it put in there and get it to work out.
Yeah, it's a business decision, not a technical decision.
It is a business decision, right? And the customer is
right.
kind of left out, which sort of brought us to that third point, which is that all interested parties can influence the technology's direction. Josh, you brought up that, in a standards process and connectivity standards, nobody's really vying directly for the customer.
Right.
As opposed to a failing fast approach where the customer is the one giving the feedback, and you can fail quickly, you can iterate, and you can develop that core of your technology such that it does exactly what the customers need with no fluff, nothing else. And that's something that you've been able to uniquely do at Ingenu. And then finally, the one network feel for customers and application partners. Josh, you were saying that your partners aren't really concerned about whether it is a standard or not. They just want to know that it works.
It works, yep.
Does it work? And does it bring the benefits that they need? And if it does, great. If they can make the money they need to make, fantastic.
Absolutely.
And Ted, you talked about the fractured bands and very complex, you can almost say Rubik's Cube situation. Like how,
That's a good way to put it.
if you want to have a global deployment, you got to figure out what bands to support, which carriers you actually want to pay for to certify, right? Because you have to pay to certify per device, per carrier, and then all the other different things that go into trying to select which cellular solution to choose, and then we discussed a bit at the end there, just the sheer size of the marketplace that the 2.4 band grants everyone, and the fact that it's good for partners because they get a large marketplace, and also it's good for customers because more competition also makes it so that you get better products and lower prices. So that's our quick summary of what we talked about today. Was there anything we missed? Anything else you wanted to add before we go to questions? And then
I think you summed it up really well.
Yeah, I
think
think
we should go to the
so,
questions
too.
and see what people are.
Okay,
see what
great.
people are
Yep,
asking.
absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Thank you all for participating up to this point. We're going to go to some questions. So I will read off the question, and then we'll have our panel members here respond. So, all right, our first question is about the fractured cellular market, Ted, that you talked about. Do you see the fractured cellular market cleaning up as the standards develop moving forward?
So I think I'm assuming that this question is regards to the the LPWA undertaking that 3G and PP in particular is undertaking, and first of all, I think it's really prudent for them to understand that LPWA is real. It's happening now, and that they are pivoting very strongly in this direction, which I think is really good news. I mean, I think it underscores the value, the prop, and the excitement associated with that industry. They had, and it's also an admission that 2G, 3G, 4G is not the right path. It's something else really needs to be done. So I think it's really good that they're going in this direction. The cracks that are a little bit showing, I would say, would be around the fact that there's just so many standards that seem to be on the drawing board, and I think that has a number of detrimental effects. Ecosystem participants, they have to kind of guess a little bit which one they're going to rally behind, and these aren't small investments. And choosing a technology is a substantial and in many cases company make or break. And so if you look at just in the last couple of years what's been happening there, it started with clean slate, and that's already kind of washed out. There was Cat 1 and Cat 0, which just made sense to try to use the LTE network as much as possible. And then there's LTEM, if I'm not mistaken, that is kind of pointed in that direction. But then pretty close on the heels of that is narrowband IoT, and that seems to be getting a lot of mind share. Maybe that's the winning horse. I don't know. I think there's ecosystem.
Haven't even brought up 5G yet.
Yeah, and then there's 5G, and they're doing their own IoT development, and I don't know if anybody knows when that's going to hit. And then extended coverage GSM. So that's another one. So it's a little daunting.
Yeah, I think Ted nailed it on the head. There's so many solutions coming from the cellular world to address IoT, and what's really kind of confusing, it's confusing for somebody even that follows that market full time, but really it's confounding is that a lot of these technologies aren't compatible with one another and actually are a little predatorial of one another. Cat 0 was a big technology that everyone was talking about a year ago to be a good cellular solution for IoT, and that's largely going to be skipped over now because of narrowband IoT. So hopefully, as to your point, you were in a company that made a big investment in the Cat 0. So so to answer the question, will fragmentation continue? I think it will. History tells us that. And I think that's a big advantage for our technology. Going back to our earlier conversation, we have one version of our technology, RPMA. We don't have RPMA Cat 1 or -6 or anything else. One version of our technology. And we would continue to make enhancements, improvements to that technology going forward, but those will always be with backward compatibility. So if your network's on an RPMA network, if your device is on an RPMA network today, it can be on that network 20 years from now.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so our second question, talking about standards bodies and the fact that they've been around for 15 years, right? So they've been around 15 years. Why should anyone, okay, maybe longer than that, all right. Why should I choose a startup for my network?
Okay, I can take that, I guess. First off, I don't mind being called a startup. People called Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Google startups at one time. To me, that's not important. It's not important where you're at in terms of your company's development or evolution. What's important is the service, the technology, the product that company's built on is solid, is reliable, and has value. And for us, that product is RPMA. And I think when you compare it to the other solutions in the market, you see it does have several advantages. So I think we will be around for several years. That isn't a concern because of that and for other reasons. And yes, the standards bodies will be around, I'm sure, too, for another 15 years. But what won't be around are many of the technologies that are coming out of those standards bodies. 2G in 15 years from now, 2G networks won't be around, 3G networks won't be around. Some 4G networks might still be around. But if you're building an IoT application today and it's designed to last that type of time span, I think that's a risky bet.
Okay. At the risk of stating the obvious, standards bodies like to make standards.
Yes.
So they'll probably be working on, still around, still doing good work, but working on something entirely different in 15 years.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, great. All right, so our third question. So standards allow for multiple vendor choices for customers, so we're not locked into just one. Will Ingenu partner with other companies to provide products compatible with RPMA? Josh, this sounds like
Absolutely.
right, this is your job, right?
Yeah, this is your job.
Absolutely. Yeah. If I want a job, we will be, right? No, absolutely, we will be. We've announced some partnerships already with a company called Compa. We'll have several more of those announcements coming in the near future. Not being a standard, as I mentioned earlier, is not limiting those partnerships. These partners that I'm engaging with, they're not asking that question. They're asking, what is our go-to-market strategy? And that's after we prove to them the value of our technology. So that factor is not hindering these partnership relationships at all.
Okay, great. Ted, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a great summary. Great response.
Alrighty, great. So we'll go on to our next question. So in general, what is the certification path to get a device on the Ingenu network?
So you probably have a lot more detail on this than I do, because this is, again, is your day-to-day, but I mean, it's designed to be very minimally invasive. So, 2.4, it's unlicensed, but it's not unregulated spectrum. It's, very strongly regulated. So there's a little bit of work to get certification of 2.4, of a 2.4 device, but it's fairly minimal. And, with a radio module that we sell, it's modularly certified. It largely becomes just a paperwork exercise, for a device manufacturer. And then you can, take that pretty much anywhere. Once you're certified on one network, it's very easy to have kind of this worldwide presence. And, we don't really look at the certification program of RPMA as something that is a lot of, bureaucracy. If anything, we're just kind of helpful advisors walking people through that. So we want to make that as, if a device manufacturer, if they want to put a lot of work into getting the exact RF performance dialed in and matching antennas and all that kind of stuff because they feel it's a competitive advantage, they can do that. If they don't, because to them it's not important and they're going after a different price point, we can support that as well. So we really want to make this as simple as we possibly can for the device manufacturers in particular in this case.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect summary of it. As we build these partnerships, you mentioned the cellular world certification problem. Certification can be an issue. Mm-hmm. It's costly. It lengthens time to market. That's not something we want to do. We have certification programs in place, but those will be minimal. They'll be, and we'll make it as easy as possible for our partners to bring products to market.
All right, great. So simple sounds like the word.
Yes.
Okay. Alrighty, so we talked about global coverage, and somebody's asking, what's the actual coverage in the Americas? I wish we had like a little map.
A graphic
we
aid would be nice.
We'd certainly grab a map, but the plan now for the Ingenu machine network in the U.S., we will have 30 cities covered in the United States by the end of 2016. And we've already launched networks in areas like Dallas and Riverside, California. And we'll continue to build out those cities as we move through the year. And I would note that our coverage in those areas, when we talk about having a metropolitan area covered, that's pretty comprehensive coverage. For Dallas is the best example. We have coverage all the way from Dallas all the way to Fort Worth. It's about 30 miles separating those two locations. If you've ever been to the DFW area, it's pretty widespread. And there's several metropolitan hamlets within that area, areas like Arlington and Plano. That coverage includes all of those areas. So
I think it's 2,000 square miles.
2,000 square miles. So it's a very comprehensive network when we do roll them out to these cities.
Okay, great. And any comment on the rest of the Americas?
So yeah, I think based on our coverage advantage, because we engineered the technology, for many things, coverage, capacity, power consumption, we are able to roll, a single access point on a tower, routinely covers 200 square miles, even in, urban areas, even with, the interference effects that we've learned to account for. So coverage goes up very, very quickly.
Okay, great, awesome, Thank you. Alrighty, so what % of countries won't support frequencies used by Ingenu? Someone says that they've heard 30%.
I don't know if that jives with our experience. I mean, we've pretty much have been on 6 continents and, basically have our endpoints, both the RF module and access points certified in, in countries around the world. And we have yet to find a country that, doesn't honor the 2.4 as an unlicensed band. A little bit we're riding on the shoulders of giants here. Wi-Fi is so worldwide pervasive that, turning 2.4 into anything but open, is really somewhat unthinkable just due to the, consumer use of the 2.4 spectrum. So not to say it could never happen, but 30%, I don't know, what do you think, Josh? That
Yeah, I mean, it just
kind of high.
Yeah, it seems really high to me, extremely high to me. I mean, obviously, we are working to build out our networks in international markets as well through global licensees. I think we've have networks in place or being built up in about 50 countries, 50 territories worldwide, and we really haven't run into this issue yet. So 30% really seems extremely high to me. And I would compare our technology, using 2.4 to some of the other LPWA solutions using sub-gigahertz spectrum, which isn't available globally. It's fractured and has some limitations. So if you're comparing apples to apples, I think you see our spectrum availability is going to be much higher than those other solutions.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Alrighty, so can you speak to the cost of devices and service? It's a cost question.
Roughly, we look at our module development, our node development. We are generally in that 2G ballpark of pricing. So not to get more specific in that, and that's obviously we feel the need to bring that pricing down as we move forward. Realize that's a key requirement of the market, and that's something we will do, and that's something, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing through our partnership agreements that we will be announcing very shortly. I don't know if you can speak to the connectivity piece a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, it's just not to get too far off topic, but because of the capacity advantages of the network, the cost of bringing connectivity is very, very low. Because fundamentally, our business model is we're often not the carrier. We're enabling carriers around the world, and so they need to make money, of course. But when you can have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of devices per tower, kind of funding the recurring cost of the, and often in case tower rental, construction costs associated with deploying on that tower, the floor of that price of connectivity can be made very, very low, and that's one of the dyed-in-the-wool aspects of RPMA when we kicked this off 8 years ago.
Obviously, it's the advantage of using unlicensed spectrum as well.
Right, no spectrum expense.
So Ted, you've mentioned in the past talking about just the actual components that make up, say, an RPMA module. Is there anything specific to that wouldn't make it so that price could get as low as necessary? Or
No, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that all technologies kind of follow a volume curve. So the more volume you have, the lower your cost per component because you can buy in bulk. And the more you can do to integrate components together, we're pretty much probably on a very similar point of the curve that GSM is, and only going down lower. There's nothing fundamental about RPMA that requires any cost over any other technology that exists the 2.4 band, and so that really shows that we can go after these enormous numbers of devices by lowering down to the cost point to hit even the lowest value endpoint in that last billion out of that 100 billion.
Well, and to tie into maybe one of the last points we talked about was just the path to scale being so fast and so simple. If you're only selling one kind of module, right, then you now only need to develop half of even what somebody else would do. Let's pretend that somebody else has two different types of regions that they have to support. Well, now our path to scale is only one path as opposed to cutting up volumes across two bands. So even there, I mean, you drive prices down at a really quick
scale
rate.
Certainly brings down price fairly quickly, and we've seen that already. And I think we realized that to be successful in this business, we need to be. I mentioned this is a very price-sensitive market. We need to make sure that cost of bringing an IoT application to market is as low as possible, and that includes the hardware, that includes the software, that includes the connectivity piece, and that's something we're already doing.
Okay, great. All right, looks like we have two more questions. So our next question is, in general, what is the certification path? We talked about that a bit. So which standards bodies does Ingenu support or belong to?
I'll let you take that.
So, at the moment, we're very supportive of the data standards, kind of to bring it back to sort of the, the initial premise. We constantly are monitoring the various different data standards that are out there, 1M to M, Project Haystack, there's a lot of really good data standards out there that we're not actively involved in. I mean, we tend to be somewhat agnostic. REST interface, really kind of plugs us into to a lot of these, data standards. Connectivity standards, we really believe that, the de facto path that we're on is freeing us up the most to be able to do the development and service the customer's needs. So we really don't actively participate in any, what we would call, connectivity standards bodies.
Okay.
I think it's something we, obviously we'll always examine. If it ever makes sense for us, that's something, we would consider. But, at this point, I think we're pretty comfortable with the path that we've taken.
And I think we could say our CEO calls that the de facto standard.
The de facto
approach.
standard, yes.
Right,
absolutely.
Yeah, always keen to talk about that. All right, so our final question. Can you talk about the first mover advantage and how that factors into replacing 2G connections? Is your technology able to support 2G devices?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that first mover advantage, is obviously a clear opportunity at the moment here in North America with AT&T sunsetting their 2G network and other carriers to follow. And that's where we've seen some of the strongest interest in our technology. That's one reason we're building out the machine network here in the US, because there is that clear opportunity. And our technology is more than capable of supporting devices that have been using 2G previously. And it's not just 2G here in North America, that those concerns are going to extend to other regions, other countries, and they've already happened in some countries as well. And in Europe, it's actually interesting. If you like, the concern is actually more about 3G. So if you said, all right, 3G is my future-proofing solution, I won't have to worry about network longevity. That's not the case in Europe. Some European operators have already announced they're going to shut down 3G prior to 2G. So it just makes it very confusing for a customer going to market with a cellular solution. Like, what technology do I use in what region? And but to answer the question, RPMA is more than capable of supporting those types of devices.
Excellent.
I agree with that.
All right, great. So we did receive a lot of questions about Sigfox and LoRa. We wanted, so I'm just going to address a little bit about some of the questions there. So when we think about Sigfox and LoRa, obviously Sigfox has never claimed to be a standards-based technology. LoRa says it is a standards-based technology. We won't go into that here. But I think it really comes down to, if you want to differentiate RPMA from a Sigfox technology and LoRa, it comes down to what, Ted, you were talking about earlier, capacity and coverage, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to just maybe talk a little bit about that, and then we'll need to end.
A little bit it kind of dovetails on what you were saying, Josh, about 2G, whether we can support 2G devices, and we're not going to be doing voice and above data rates, so
Okay.
but we'll be doing pretty much any machine that is on a 2G network can land on our network, and that's a little bit in contrast to sort of the value prop of some of these other, what we would call other existing LPWA technologies, where predominantly one way, unacknowledged delivery, not flexible packet sizes, capacity challenges. These are the things that we have solved, and that's lets us be in a position to kind of take these 2G devices and put them on our system. Not to say that there's zero need for kind of one way non-authenticated, non-acknowledged delivery, but a little bit, I would say you have to be creative as to where that actually plays and what applications that can play in. Because the one thing that the cellular guys have done is they set a pretty good job setting the bar high in terms of data features, robustness, congestion control,
Sure.
acknowledged delivery, security, and I think people are going to be, the industry could potentially be disappointed with connectivity vendors that don't meet that, bare minimum bar.
Sure, yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, great. All right. So we have a lot of questions, a lot on IP-based technology. We just don't have time to talk about it, unfortunately, right now. But we will follow up on questions. We'll make sure and give a response to as many questions as we can, including these. So thank you all for participating today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Mike.
And
Thanks, Mike.
You, absolutely.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you
Take care.
all, and have a great day.
Take care.